If you look at a map, you'll notice that there are two Mongolias. Now, if you hear the word Mongolia, the imagery that is conjured up might be stark plateaus and steppes, vast deserts, yurts, horses, falcons, nomads, and emptiness. This is Mongolia. 18th biggest country in the world, population only 3 million. But there's another Mongolia, and it looks a little different. Inner Mongolia is a province of China, population 25 million. However, 80% of the people living here are actually Han Chinese. Despite that, there are still 4 million ethnic Mongolians living here, which makes their population in China even higher than their own native sovereign country. Now that the factoids are out of the way, let me let you in on a little secret. China doesn't really want you to know about this place, and for a good reason. If you're like me and you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you probably heard the phrase Free Tibet. Tibet is one of those Chinese provinces that even people with a minimal interest in China know about. Here you have this massive swath of land in western China with 90% of the population who are not in fact Chinese, that speak a different language, eat different foods, have different religious beliefs, and vocally do not want to be a part of China. China deals with this want for independence with the utmost military brutality, and everyone knows it. Free Tibet is something that everyone knows about. Everyone knows China's mortal enemy, the Dalai Lama. Fast forward to today, and the hot button province to talk about is Xinjiang, another far western province of China with about 45% ethnic Uyghur majority. These people don't look Chinese, they also don't speak Chinese. They're predominantly Muslim in faith, they're a Turkic people, and the majority also doesn't want to be a part of China, but their own nation, called East Turkestan. China's cracking down by throwing millions of them into re-education camps, banning their religion, texts, traditions, and cultural identity. China needs this territory for oil, and its actions in the region are finally being talked about in news and other media. However, Inner Mongolia is a province that no one really talks about. Maybe it's because Mongolians living there enjoy being part of China. Maybe it's the fact that the Han majority controls any and all information coming out of it. Maybe it's a powder keg ready to explode with separatist movements that China does its best to keep under wraps from foreign journalists so as not to end up with another Tibet or Xinjiang. Yeah, it's that one. I moved to Inner Mongolia in 2011 to the steel-making city of Baotou. It was a stark change from the lush green democracy of Taiwan that I had lived in the previous year. When my plane landed, I was picked up in an old Volkswagen Santana and driven through the coal smoke-filled night, across icy roads, through a vast expanse of squat, ugly buildings, only to be dropped off at my building, literally made partially of styrofoam. My apartment was covered in coal soot and sparse to say the least, but this would be my home for the next 2 years. Now, there's a ton of stories I could tell from my time in Inner Mongolia, like the time they decided to cut half of my building off and there were birds living in my house and a snowstorm blew in as I laid in a sleeping bag. But anyway, I digress. I taught at a university which was mostly full of female students pursuing a degree in education, journalism, ironically, and similar fields. However, my students were quite a bit more cheery and happy-go-lucky than my students down south. In fact, on my first day of classes, one male student that I had was smoking a cigarette at the window in the back of the classroom and literally cracked open a beer during my lecture. This was a bit of insight on how things worked in this frigid, dry, industrial city. My students were mostly Han Chinese, which makes up about 90% of China's population, so the majority, but I noticed that a handful of Mongolian students that I had mostly kept to themselves. Throughout my friendships and journeys I made throughout the province, over 2 years, I noticed that life in Inner Mongolia was very different from the rest of China. Even the Han people, the Chinese majority, were more starkly adventurous and outspoken, more confident, loved to drink, and they were much hardier and brave than most of the people I'd met in the rest of China. Water was in short supply, and most people only took a shower once or twice a week. Some people didn't even have showers in their houses, so yeah, the Han Chinese people in Inner Mongolia were different, but I still hadn't made friends with any Mongolians. I hardly saw them. I knew that they were there, but why were they never part of the groups of people that I hung out with? The first evidence that I had that there might be some bad blood between the Mongolians and Han Chinese was when a huge brawl broke out, and I witnessed my local friend Jason try to break it up. Turns out some Mongolians walked over to a table of Han Chinese and said that they hated China and that Inner Mongolia was rightfully theirs, etc., etc. This happened many, many, many times. Mongolian students had stabbed Han students with swords, riots broke out at restaurants at night, police were constantly called. Yet when I asked everyone why there was so much animosity, no one would give me a clear answer. I knew I wouldn't find out the answer in this Han majority city, so I spent the following years traversing the province in search of that Mongolian identity in China. I spent thousands of miles on motorcycle, 4x4, on road, off-road, alone, with friends, just getting lost and talking to people. Inner Mongolia, outside of the Chinese cities, was very different. This was the Mongolia you think of. Rolling grasslands, arid deserts and dunes, and vast stretches of nothingness. Nomads herding sheep and goats. These places are where the Mongols are. The people that I spoke to often couldn't communicate in Chinese, but when I did find people that could, they never hesitated to tell me that they were not Chinese. It was of the utmost importance that I knew that. They spoke passionately about how their land was taken away from them, and the army would frequently raid their settlements and yurts with accusation of separatism. The PLA, the People's Liberation Army of China, has basically been given free rein to police the vast lawless lands with little to no discretion. There were areas that would dip in and out of the country of Mongolia. The border is quite loose, with many people communicating with each other on both sides, both trying to start uprisings in small border towns and villages. We met people driven to tears when talking about how their life was destroyed and how they are now relegated to certain areas, not allowed to travel or lead their normal nomadic way of life. Turns out the collectivist nature of Chinese society doesn't mesh very well with the individualist nomadic lifestyle of the Mongolians. We saw firsthand on our last trip to Inner Mongolia, when we were filming Conquering Northern China, our documentary, how prevalent the military police state is nowadays. The PLA army patrols areas with high Mongolian populations and has special detective units as well as SWAT teams stationed across the provinces for the explicit purpose of suppressing any uprisings of Mongolians against the CCP. Mongolian language schools were very popular amongst the locals, and they're now being converted to Mandarin Chinese only. And the rapid development in infrastructure and tourism is splintering the last remnants of Mongolian culture within China's borders. We were searched, interrogated, harassed, and basically driven out of the province just based on the assumption that we were going to stumble across and maybe film something that the government didn't want us to see. Let me tell you, having 10 plus SWAT team members with automatic weapons show up in your hotel room and grilling you about every piece of knowledge of where you've been the past 9 years, where you've worked, where you shop, who your kids and wife are, and even more information that shows you the paranoia that surrounds the area currently. Thankfully, my contact in the Inner Mongolian government had told us that a Mongolian uprising, especially in the town that we were visiting, they were pretty common, and the government buildings were often set on fire in a statement of independence. The tight control is the reason you don't hear anything about this. We learned that the local Mongolians on the steppe and the grasslands, they lose a lot of money to bribes every year, to patrolling soldiers, and the government's doing their best to cut the populace off from family and Mongolian media right across the border. I mean, Mongolia, the sovereign nation across the border, is by no means a democratic paradise, but there's a lot more camaraderie for their own kind than love for the Han Chinese telling them how they can live. I'll never forget this Mongolian boy who taught us how to roast a goat the traditional way from the inside out when we were filming for the documentary, and what he said to us in tears. He told us in Chinese, "You guys get to enjoy this place. You show up, you enjoy the beauty, you get on your bikes and you ride away to go home. I'm stuck here. I'm trapped. That's how we Mongolians feel here." Now, after being harassed by the army and SWAT team, he knew that we were headed for some serious trouble down the road, so he actually mapped us a route off-road to avoid any potential problems later on, and I'm forever indebted to him. But his tearful speech at that dinner table just sticks with me today. It's not only limited to the Mongolian minority, though. There's tons of ethnic minorities living within the confines of Inner Mongolia province in China. We met some reindeer folk who were previously allowed to defend their herds with small guns, but now the reindeer's numbers are dwindling due to bear attacks, because they can't shoot the bears anymore, and consumption of the reindeer parts for Chinese medicine. It's interesting to see how China tries to integrate the ethnic minorities with the promises of wealth and development and a Chinese identity. This has marginally worked with some of the minorities in the south, like the Miao people and the Daizhu people, But this may partly be due to the fact that they are society-based people groups. Their languages and cultures, at this point, have been diluted to the point where there's no chance of an uprising. But with nomadic types like the Mongolians, their culture simply has nothing in common with the Chinese majority. Inner Mongolia remains to be my favorite province in China. It's vast, it's beautiful, it's diverse. You really feel like you can escape. But unfortunately, just like any area under the totalitarian control of the Communist Party of China, it will probably end up like every other industrialized province in the country. And if China has any say, you won't ever know what they did behind the scenes to make it that way. Although the future of Inner Mongolia's cultural identity might be undetermined, we can say, it doesn't detract from the fact that I've had so many amazing experiences there, and I feel like one of the best time capsules ever made in the province of Inner Mongolia was when we were shooting Conquering Northern China. If you guys have not seen it yet, there's an entire, about 1 hour long episode dedicated to this beautiful place and the people that we met, and I highly recommend you guys check it out. So go over to vimeo.com/ondemand/Conquering Northern China and use the discount code Laowinning. Please go check it out if you haven't already. I think it's some of the best work we've ever done.